Now when you get into 3D Studio Max here, into the interface of it, you see there's tons of stuff, right? Tons of buttons everywhere, but it can be broken down into several main components. You have a menu bar, which you're probably pretty familiar with from other applications. You have a toolbar, which again, commonly used tools. Most of them are contained in here or here. Just button interface to commonly used menu items. You have down here, you have a timeline and a bunch of other boxes for entering certain types of things, a bunch of buttons. We'll get to all of these. The two main ones I want to focus on right now are one, the command panel, and two, these viewports. Now, the viewports are incredibly important because we're creating 3D stuff, so each one of these represents a view into your 3D scene, a view from the top, the front, and the left. Those are orthographic views, which means that they just project straight down with no perspective, straight down or straight front or straight to one side of your scene, and then you have perspective. And then next to that you have this command panel. This command panel has several different tabs pertaining to different types of things you can do. You can create, you can modify, you can work with hierarchies, you can do work with motions, display, and utilities. And we'll get to we'll use those as we need them. For now, we're going to concentrate on creating things. This is one of the best parts about 3D Studio Max, is just how easy it is to get in and immediately start creating stuff. Okay, so within the Create tab, you have a bunch of different classes of things. You have geometry, you have shapes, you have lights, you have cameras, you have helpers, you have space warps and systems, and tons of different things. And even within each class of things that you can create, there's a drop-down menu here which allows you to further refine that class of stuff. So there's classes within classes, so different types of geometry that you can create, and then each one of those has different types within it. So there's hundreds of things that you can immediately create in 3D Studio, and it's incredibly easy to do so. All you do is you click on one of the buttons. We'll click on a teapot, standard 3D primitive, right? There's a whole history of it, but we'll get into that later maybe. And then to create anything, you go out to the viewport and you click and drag. Now, different types of objects have a different number of parameters that you want to initially set. So if I create a teapot, I just click and drag, okay, and then that creates a teapot of a certain size, however long I've drug for. If I create a box, I click and drag to set the length, and then I drag again, I click again, then drag to set the height of the box. And if I go back to teapot, I can click and create a bunch of other little teapots. So this is common in 3D Studio. If you click on a button someplace, and there's several places you can click on these buttons, and it remains yellow, it means it is an active tool, which means you can just create bunches of them immediately. All right, and then if you want to abandon that tool, you can right-click and cancel out of it. And another great thing about it is if I'm drawing something, let's say I'm drawing this huge teapot, and oh man, I don't really want that teapot at all. If you right-click, it will abandon that current creation, still leave you in that tool mode, so you can right-click again and then exit that tool mode completely. So that's neat. I've just created a bunch of stuff, but now I want to be able to see it, right? So I can see it mostly in my ortho views, but in my perspective view, I'm not able to see everything. Now, that means we need to be able to manipulate those views. So this is something that you're going to do. It's the thing that you're going to do the most, is manipulating views. And so there's some hotkeys for it, and there's also some buttons for it. I'm going to tell you the hotkeys first, because that's what you're going to do 95% of the time at least, is use your hotkeys and your mouse buttons to manipulate views. And the central one to 3D Studio is the middle mouse button. So if you have you probably do have a middle mouse button, even if you don't think you do, because if you have a mouse with a rolly ball on it, if you click it, if you push on it and hold it down, that rolly ball or rolly wheel, that acts as a middle click. And when you middle click with your mouse in one of the views, it acts as a pan. So you see it turns to a little hand and allows you to pan the view around. Works in perspective as well, so you can get a good idea of what's going on. Well, you still can't see everything, so we need to be able to zoom out, in or out. And that's where you roll the wheel. If you roll the wheel, you can zoom in or out of any view. Okay? Now, 3D Studio has this notion of an active viewport, so even if I roll in and out and I'm kind of over here, sometimes I need to be able to make that view active. Sometimes you sort of forget and you're like, oh, zoom this one in or out, but it's actually zooming that one. In order to make a view active, right-click in it. One quick right-click, tongue twister, and then you can pan that view. All right. Now, with things like a perspective view, a common thing that you want to be able to do is rotate around that perspective view and see what you've got. So that's when you hold down Alt and you click the middle mouse button. That allows you to rotate your view around either the scene or a certain point. Okay. So zoom in or out, rotate around, and pan back and forth and up and down. Now, sometimes those camera controls aren't quite enough. You need a few additional ones. That's where down here in the lower right hand corner you have all these controls which pertain to the view. So you see that when I'm zooming in or out with the middle mouse button, wheeling in or out, it depends on your mouse I guess, but it's pretty, it's not a very granular, it's not a very fine-grained zoom. So that's where you can come down here and you can use the little zoom tool to go in or out. And that gives you a little bit more control over where you're going with it. Right below that, you see there's a rectangle zoom, and rectangle zoom allows you to draw a box in which you can zoom in very specifically to something, to some part. Okay. Next to that, you have a hand. I almost never use this hand because it's the exact same hand as we had before, just by clicking the middle mouse button. So very rarely use this hand, if ever. Right above that, you have this button, which is Zoom All. And what Zoom All does is similar to drag a box zoom, but it allows you to drag in any one of the views and it'll zoom all the views all at one time. Right next to that, you have a button which is Zoom Extents. What that does is zoom to the entire scene in the currently selected view. So if I right-click here, make it active, and then hit that Zoom Extents button, it will zoom to everything that's in the scene. Now, that Zoom Extents button has a little tiny black triangle in the corner of it, which means that it's a flyout, which means that if I hold it down, it'll operate, it will give me access to related, to similar, but slightly different tools. So right now, if I'm in Zoom Extents, if I hit this one, that's zoom to selected in the current view. So there's Zoom Extents and Zoom Selected. So what that does is gives me whatever I have picked, it will in the current view zoom to that. Right next to it is related. These tools behave very similarly, but instead of doing it to just a selected view, they do it to all views. So if I click on this, it's going to Zoom Extents in all 4 of my viewports. And if I zoom to selected, Zoom Extents all selected is what the entire name of that tool. It's a wordy way of saying it zooms in every viewport to what I have picked. And right below that, you have a little button that's the maximize viewport toggle. What that means is it just is going to make whatever view you've got picked bigger. So it's going to take up the entire viewport. So it's just maximizing that view and then restoring it back to the 4, the quad view. Next to that, you have this arc rotate. Remember, we talked about arc rotate when we hold down Alt and middle mouse button. That's a quick shortcut for arc rotating. And so you can invoke the tool, and what you get is a little manipulator here. And so you can click anywhere on the inside of it and rotate around. It'll also allow you to, if you pick on these little, top and side boxes, it'll allow you to constrain your rotation to one direction or another. And actually, you can do that with the middle mouse technique. If you hold down Alt and then also hold down Shift and you push the middle mouse button down and drag in one particular direction, you can see the cursor changes to a sort of a constrained mode. And so you can constrain it to one view or another with the hotkeys as well. But you still might use this button because this button, as you see, has a flyout. So it's got 3 different modes of operation. Right now I'm in the selected mode, which means that it's going to rotate around whatever I have picked. So if I go in and pick something else and now rotate, it's going to rotate around that new thing that I've got picked. And that works even if you're not in the in the tool mode here, don't have that tool picked, it works with the hotkey as well. So whatever I have picked, it's going to rotate the view around. Okay. Now, and that's where you may use this button because it has arc rotate around the scene, which just means that it's going to rotate around rather the camera's center. So you rotate around the camera's center that way. Or as I said, selected, which is, I like to use it with selected. But it also has one other mode, which is arc rotate, or the yellow one, which is arc rotate around selected, which, or excuse me, around sub-object, which means we're going to talk about sub-objects later. And 3D Studio is kind of a subtle convention. When it's gray, it means it applies to the scene. So even like here, you have a gray one and a white one, and in here you have a gray one and a white one. That pertains to scene or camera or whatever, and that white pertains to whatever a whole object that you have selected, and yellow usually means do something to or rotate around or whatever a sub-object selection. Now, sub-object selection is something that we're going to talk about quite a bit because it is an incredibly powerful way of modifying objects.